You knew when you arrived there would be problems. There had been hostility, any which way you'd traveled. You'd been told to be careful in Europe. It didn't matter where in Europe. You knew people were looking, watching, judging. Only recently, though, you'd noticed the authorities taking a greater interest in you than ever before. Then it started. The police stalking, watching, taking notes. Then came the notices. Your natural rhythm and right to traveling were taken from you by law. Then came the nation's Socialist German Workers' Party, gaining steam and attention by the day. There's talk they'll take the parliament. One angry, screaming man, catching the whole country's attention, declares you enemies of the race-based state. The Nazis had many enemies reduced to a list, to be exterminated and fulfill a twisted vision of racial superiority. Among their highest priorities were the Romani people. Welcome to History on Fleek. Today we examine the harrowing things the Nazis did to the Romani people. In a long, winding enmity that lasts to this day, the Romani community has long faced discrimination across the continent of Europe. If we're looking at early modern history, it's a long list of Romani populations arriving in Europe and soon being expelled. Let's begin at the beginning. The Romani were expelled from Meissen, Germany in 1416, from Lucerne in 1471, from Milan in 1493, from France in 1504, from Catalonia in 1512, from Sweden in 1525, from England in 1530, and finally from Denmark in 1536. Yeah, I think you get the picture. Make no mistake, this was hostile. Europe experienced Romani culture and, frankly, turned the other way. Across the 16th century, Romanis that did not leave England or Denmark in a month faced execution. Sadly, as time moved on, the persecutory stance of Europe against the Romani people did not budge. By the 19th century, the Romani in Europe faced ethnic cleansing, forced labor, and naturally, the Romani moved east, finding the most accommodating place in Russia, where as long as they paid annual taxes, they were treated more fairly. The Romani people were a population firmly in the crosshairs of the Nazi racial regime. Following Hitler's passage of a decree to the Nuremberg Laws in November 1935, the Romani were declared enemies of the race-based state. It needs to be stated, however, this framing of the Romani people was in play a fair few decades before Hitler came along. A pungent mix of social Darwinism and scientific racism across the late 19th century was increasingly broadcast across Europe. All of a sudden, the German public, and others across the continent, had pseudoscience backing prejudice against the Romani and the Jewish people. Even in the Weimar Republic, long before World War II, this racial hierarchy worldview became systemized. In 1899, Munich's Imperial Police Headquarters set up an entire police department to keep surveillance and gather information on the Romani population. Before the 20th century had even begun, a domestic police force on the grounds in Europe had an information services on Romani department. In 1926, Bavaria enforced the law for the fight against gypsies, vagrants, and the work-shy. The law soon became the standard for the nation, forbade the Romani from free movement, and any unemployment was reposted with forced labor. Come just a decade later, an establishment already geared towards the Romani people was thrown into overdrive. From 1933, ugly, stigmatizing law and Nazi ideology went hand in hand. The asocial Romani community was stigmatized as social misfits, criminals, and waifs. Weaponizing the law against dangerous habitual criminals, arbitrary arrest and detention of the Romani people became a norm, referred to by the Nazis as gypsies and an inferior race. The Romani were propagandized as a threat to the German people. Under a regime whose underlying goal was a sickening, warped vision of racial purity, the Romani were targeted for prosecution and murder. By 1938, the Nazi regime began deporting the Romani people to concentration camps. Romani identity has a sprawling and layered cultural history. The exact origins of the Romani identity are still a matter of debate. Yet scholarly opinion centers on the observation they originated in India and began a mass exodus across Europe throughout the Middle Ages. An amalgam of their cultural origins, the Romani people have their own distinct language, showing roots in Hindi and other Indo-Aryan languages. Culturally, the Romani have their own rich traditions of culture and crafts, be it music, dance, horse trading, metalworking, and storytelling. Yet along with organic culture, the Romani are an identity long held as subjects to romantic myths and stereotypes. While most Romani people are practicing Christians, many are Muslim or Hindu. There are many Romani practicing witchcraft and palmistry. Ultimately, the individual yet diasporic culture of the Romani have historically clashed with the dogmatic, feudalist cultures of Europe and beyond. Among the many stereotypes leveled against the Romani identity is the projected idea that they are inherently criminal, and in some cases have magical powers. The term gypsy has historically followed the Romani people, and has long been declared a slur. It reinforces stereotypes and keeps perceptions of the identity fixed on criminality. This kind of terminology and perspective has long kept marginalization and discrimination against Romani people ongoing, despite a diaspora spanning the United States, Europe, Australia, Canada, and Brazil. The Romani people have played important roles throughout history across the arts and activism, yet this goes hand in hand with a long, painful history of discrimination. The Romani Holocaust is known as the Porajmos in Romani. The translation into English, the devouring. It is not an overstatement that the Holocaust has its own Romani strand and story. The fate of the Romani under the Nazis was the same as their vision for the Jewish people: genocide. Beginning in the late 1930s, having outlawed their freedom of movement and denied their citizenship by law, the Romani were rounded up to be transported to the concentration camps. Before their deportation to concentration camps as early as 1936, Romani communities were deported to city outskirt internment camps in the name of crime prevention. Much like their counterparts of persecution and deportation, the Romani, too, were herded into ghettos before their camp deportation. The conditions faced by the Romani in the concentration camps were uniformly horrifying and brutal. Among the many thousands suffering, Romani people were dying from starvation, disease, and in some cases, medical experimentation. Of the Romani whose fate had consigned them to the concentration camps, an overwhelming proportion would be murdered. Scholarly estimates vary of the exact total killed by the Nazis, yet the numbers lie between 200,000 and 500,000 Romani people murdered in the Holocaust. Disturbingly, the Roma population in Europe at the time was a little under 1 million. Yeah, that's right. Around 25 to 50% of the Roma population was killed. The largest concentration camp site specifically for the Romani was at Auschwitz-Birkenau, where it's understood as many as 25,000 Romani were deported and a majority killed there. The shape of the war in Europe at the time meant the Nazis would have collaborators, and none would enact horror on the Romani population quite like occupied Yugoslavia. Jasenovac was the named place for perhaps the most barbarous concentration camp to spawn from the evils of World War II. Established in 1941, the camp did not run like the Nazi-run German camps. There were no chambers, no orchestrated factory killing. Jasenovac practiced individual, hand-to-hand violence. Despite a death count of between 70,000 and 100,000, these were people killed with hammers, knives, and axes. The third largest concentration camp in Europe took as many as 15,000 to 25,000 Romani lives. Nazi Germany concentration camp regime was enforced through systemic registration and rounding up of their victims. There were areas of Eastern and Southeastern Europe that escaped such clutches. Yet the Romani people who were not sent to concentration camps were no less vulnerable to a barbaric fate. Between forced labor or relocation and confiscation of their property, the Nazis would gain infamy for their mass shootings of Romani persons through the SS as they marched across the East. In the Soviet Union alone, there were 8,000 documented instances of Romani murders at the hands of the Einsatzgruppen. The Romani story only continued after the war, despite the Nazi efforts to extinguish their identity. Tragically, despite a world that had just witnessed their near destruction, the prejudice against the Romani people remained across much of the world. It wouldn't be until 1982 that West Germany would officially recognize its atrocity against the Romani. Following the war, Czechoslovakia's communist government would enforce social engineering on the Romani population, not a million miles from the medical experimentation of the Nazis. In an attempt to curb the growth of Romani populations, the government actively supported the forced sterilization of Romani women. Such policies could also be found in neighboring Slovakia, and were not repealed in law until 1991. The considerable arguments against this practice was how forced these sterilizations were. Romani women rightfully complained they were never informed what sterilization meant. A 2005 report by Otakar Motejl found unlawful instances of sterilization from the 1970s till 2001 in Czechoslovakia. Forever a displaced and wandering community, the Romani face a fight for the recognition of their ills to this day. Across Europe, they have been continually marginalized and blamed for crime rates, antisocial behavior. They remain a scapegoat for societal ills to this day. Contemporary polling finds strong anti-Roma sentiments hovering around the 50% mark in even Europe's most liberal of societies. Chillingly, Roma refugees from invaded Ukraine find themselves facing discrimination as they flee from dropping bombs and artillery fire. In a seemingly permanent clash of cultures between Europe's nations and the Romani people, one can only hope for a day in which marginalization and stigmatization can be overturned by trust and faith, where integration isn't weaponized and doing so does not cost a Romani the faith of their tribe. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.